Maximilian's breath caught in his throat, his pulse pounding in his ears as Christian's hand lingered against his jaw. The touch was soft, almost hesitant, but the heat that radiated from Christian's fingers burned through him. Maximilian should have pulled away, should have resisted whatever this was, but instead he found himself frozen, unable to move. His mind screamed at him to stop, to maintain the distance, to keep control of the situation. But his body seemed to be betraying him. The attraction he felt for Christian was undeniable, and it was starting to consume him in a way he couldn't escape. Christian's gaze never wavered, and Maximilian couldn't tear his eyes away from those piercing green eyes, filled with an intensity that was both unsettling and magnetic. The world seemed to narrow, everything else fading away, until it was just the two of them, standing in the darkened night. "I didn't ask for this," Maximilian muttered, though the words sounded weak, even to his own ears. Christian's lips quirked in that small, knowing smile, but his expression was softer now, almost understanding. "Neither did I," he replied quietly. "But sometimes things happen, and sometimes you can't help how you feel." Maximilian's heart skipped a beat at the implication in Christian's voice. The idea that Christian, stoic, cold, always in control, was feeling the same thing was almost too much for him to process. "I'm not like you," Maximilian said, his voice laced with frustration. "I don't need someone hovering over me. I don't need this attachment." Christian's thumb brushed lightly over Maximilian's skin, sending a shiver down his spine. "You think I want this?" His voice dropped lower, the words almost a whisper. "You think I wanted to feel this way about you?" The words hung in the air between them, thick with the weight of unspoken emotions. Maximilian's breath was shallow, his body tense, as the attraction between them flickered into something deeper, something that couldn't be denied. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this," Maximilian admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, a mixture of confusion and desire in his tone. His fingers twitched at his sides, and despite his best efforts to maintain control, he found himself leaning in just a fraction. Christian seemed to sense the shift, his hand gently tilting Maximilian's chin upward, his touch tender but firm. "You don't have to do anything," Christian murmured, his voice hushed. "You just have to accept it." Maximilian's breath hitched as their faces drew closer, the distance between them growing smaller with every passing second. He could feel the heat of Christian's body, the tension in the air like static before a storm. And then, just when it felt like the world was about to explode around them, Christian closed the gap. The kiss was electric, raw, and sudden. Maximilian's heart hammered in his chest, his mind momentarily blank as Christian's lips pressed against his with a fierce, consuming intensity. Maximilian froze for a split second, shocked, unsure. But then the world snapped into focus. His body responded before his mind could catch up, and he kissed back, hands reaching for Christian, pulling him closer. Christian's grip tightened, one hand sliding into Maximilian's hair, the other at his waist, pulling him in so there was no space between them. It was messy, it was urgent, but it was also something Maximilian had never felt before. There was no room for doubt now, no space for hesitation. When they finally broke apart, both were gasping for breath, their foreheads resting against each other. Maximilian's heart raced, a whirlwind of emotions colliding inside him, anger, confusion, desire, and something else, something more dangerous. "I didn't expect that," Maximilian breathed, his voice shaky. Christian's chest rose and fell with each breath, but his expression remained calm, as though he were used to this sort of thing. "Neither did I." Maximilian's hand hovered near his lips, his mind spinning. He had always prided himself on being in control, but in that moment, with Christian's eyes fixed on him, he felt like everything was slipping away, like the boundaries he'd carefully constructed around himself were crumbling. "What happens now?" Maximilian asked, his voice softer than he intended. Christian took a slow breath, his gaze never leaving Maximilian's. "What happens now is up to you." Maximilian frowned, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of it all. His world had always been about freedom, independence, being on his own terms. But now, with Christian standing in front of him, that world felt uncertain. The pull between them was undeniable, and it was becoming harder and harder to push away. "I don't know if I can do this," Maximilian admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability he never allowed himself to show. "I don't know if I can let go of everything I've built for myself." Christian's hand slid up to touch his cheek, his thumb gently stroking over the soft skin. "You don't have to let go of everything, but maybe it's time to let someone in. Maybe it's time to trust someone else." Maximilian's heart ached with the weight of his words, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone in that moment. He didn't feel like the outcast he had always believed himself to be. Christian's presence wasn't an invasion. It was an offer, a chance to see himself in a new light. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Maximilian murmured, still unsure. Christian smiled, a slow, genuine curve of his lips. "You don't have to be ready. You just have to take it one step at a time." The night stretched on, thick with unspoken words and the lingering heat of their kiss. Maximilian could still feel the ghost of Christian's lips against his, the pressure, the fire. It rattled him, shook the foundation of everything he thought he knew about himself. He should have pulled away. He should have laughed it off, thrown out a sarcastic remark, something to deflect from the fact that he had kissed his own bodyguard. But the worst part, the most terrifying part, was that he didn't regret it. Christian, on the other hand, stood as if nothing had happened. He was composed, calm, his eyes watching Maximilian with that same unreadable intensity. Maximilian exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his messy hair. "This is a mistake." Christian raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" "Yes," Maximilian snapped, stepping back like he'd been burned. He needed space, distance, anything to stop himself from thinking about how good it had felt to be close to him. "You're my bodyguard. This, whatever this is, it can't happen." Christian tilted his head, considering him. "You think I don't know that?" His voice was steady, but there was something darker underneath, something restrained. "But tell me something, Maximilian. Do you really want me to pretend that kiss didn't happen?" Maximilian's breath hitched. He didn't have an answer to that. Before he could respond, the door to the balcony swung open, and Alan stepped out, a lazy smirk on his lips. "Well, well, well," Alan drawled, folding his arms across his chest. "I take a short break, and when I come back, you two are making hard eyes at each other. Should I start planning the wedding?" Maximilian glared at him, his face burning. "Shut up, Alan." Alan just laughed, leaning against the doorframe. "Oh, come on. It was bound to happen. The tension between you two could set this whole place on fire." Christian shot Alan a warning look, but the blonde alpha just grinned wider. Maximilian crossed his arms over his chest. "This is not—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "It was nothing. It won't happen again." Alan raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Sure, keep telling yourself that." Christian didn't say anything, but Maximilian could feel the weight of his gaze. He refused to meet his eyes. Alan stretched, looking far too entertained by the situation. "Well, this has been fun, but I think it's time we all got some sleep, unless you two want some privacy." Maximilian shot him another glare. "Go away, Alan," Alan chuckled. All right, I'm going. But try not to sneak into Christian's room in the middle of the night, okay?" Maximilian wanted to strangle him. Alan winked before disappearing inside, leaving an unbearable silence in his wake. Maximilian turned to Christian, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. "This doesn't change anything." Christian's lips quirked slightly, just enough to make Maximilian's stomach tighten. "If that's what you want to believe." Maximilian scowled, spinning on his heel and storming back inside, his heart pounding. But long after he was back in his room, staring at the ceiling, he could still feel the warmth of Christian's touch. The next morning, Maximilian tried to act as if nothing had happened. He strode down the grand staircase of his father's estate, dressed in a loose white shirt and designer slacks, exuding his usual arrogance. He had always been good at pretending he was unaffected, pretending he didn't care. But Christian was already there, waiting. Leaning against the wall near the entrance, arms crossed over his broad chest, Christian looked effortlessly composed, his dark hair slightly tousled, those piercing green eyes locked onto Maximilian like he could see right through him. Maximilian ignored the way his stomach tightened. Alan, seated on the couch with his boots propped up on the coffee table, let out a slow whistle. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence." Maximilian rolled his eyes. "It's barely past 10. Alan smirked. "Exactly. I expected you to stay in bed all day, pouting about how your freedom is being stolen from you." "I don't pout," Maximilian snapped. Alan just grinned. "Whatever you say, Your Highness." Maximilian turned toward Christian, who had yet to say a word. "Are you just going to stand there and stare at me?" Christian's expression didn't shift. "Are you just going to pretend last night didn't happen?" Maximilian's breath caught for half a second before he scoffed. "It was a mistake." Christian took a step closer, slow, deliberate. "Is that what you really think?" Maximilian clenched his jaw. "Yes." A tense silence stretched between them, the air thick with something neither of them wanted to name. Alan, ever the troublemaker, leaned forward with an amused glint in his pale blue eyes. "You two should just fight it out already. Or make out again. Either way, it'd be entertaining." Maximilian whipped his head toward Alan. "You—" Before he could strangle him, Christian spoke, his voice calm but firm. "We need to go." Maximilian frowned. "Go where?" Christian reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black car key. "Your father arranged a meeting. We're escorting you." Maximilian groaned. "I don't need an escort. I can drive myself." Christian's expression was unreadable. "Not after what happened last week." Maximilian's frustration flared. The accident had been an unfortunate, reckless mistake, but he was still here, wasn't he? He didn't need to be babysat like a child. "I don't need you watching my every move," Maximilian said sharply. Christian stepped even closer, so close that Maximilian could feel the warmth radiating from him. "And yet, here we are." Maximilian refused to be the first to break eye contact. He lifted his chin defiantly. "I won't make this easy for you." A slow smirk ghosted over Christian's lips, the kind that sent a shiver down Maximilian's spine. "I never expected you to." Alan clapped his hands together. "All right, enough flirting. Let's get moving before Daddy Judge calls in a SWAT team." Maximilian turned on his heel and stormed toward the door, his pulse thrumming in his ears. This attraction, this dangerous, all-consuming pull, was going to be a problem. And the worst part? He wasn't sure he wanted to fight it anymore.